The first thing Sovereign Isolde saw when the royal dropship doors opened was blood splashed across the white marble promenade of her palace. For a brief second, she froze. The magnificent capital of Ethelgard, once the proud heart of the Kalen Reach, had become a battlefield. Smoke rose from shattered towers, elegant banners burned in the wind, and the air carried the bitter smell of ozone, fire, and death. Her gaze swept across the palace courtyard. Elite Taurian guards, the warriors sworn to protect the royal family, lay scattered across the marble. None of them appeared to have died in battle. Their armor was untouched, yet blood trickled from their eyes and ears, their faces twisted in silent agony. A cold realization struck her. This wasn't an ordinary assault. It was an execution. Before anyone could report the situation, only one thought echoed through her mind. The children. Prince Lysander and Princess Aurelia were still inside the East Wing. Without waiting for the landing ramp to lower completely, Isolde jumped from the dropship and sprinted toward the palace. Behind her, Pilot Bennett shouted warnings about structural damage, while Lieutenant Grayson struggled to restore communications. "Your Majesty," Grayson called. "Every communication channel inside the East Wing has been jammed. Someone created a localized electromagnetic blackout." Isolde didn't slow down. "They cut off the nursery," she whispered. 3 days. She had been away for only 3 days, attending a diplomatic summit in a neighboring sector. The palace had been considered the safest place in the galaxy. Its shields could survive a dreadnought attack. But shields meant nothing if the enemy had already been invited inside. As she knelt beside one of the fallen captains, her fears deepened. Captain Kalen's armor was intact, yet his neural tendrils were blackened and shriveled. A neural scourge. She breathed. Grayson frowned. "What is that?" "A forbidden sonic weapon," Isolde answered grimly. "It attacks our telepathic network. Every Kalen connected to it suffers catastrophic brain damage within seconds." Grayson's face hardened. So they never fought the guards. They didn't need to. The realization chilled them both. Only someone with access to the palace's internal defenses could have disabled the security systems and deployed such a weapon. This wasn't merely an invasion. It was treason. Driven by terror rather than royal dignity, Isolde raced through the ruined halls. The once beautiful corridors were scarred by plasma fire. Caretakers, tutors, servants, and nobles lay motionless where they had fallen. Every body carried the same horrifying signs of the neural scourge. The attackers hadn't wasted time. They had marched directly toward the royal nursery. Someone wanted the Kalen bloodline erased forever. When Isolde finally reached the East Wing, her heart nearly stopped. The massive blast doors protecting the nursery had been blown completely off their hinges. Smoke poured from the opening. Silence filled the hallway. No laughter. No cries. No telepathic presence from her children. Only the heavy stillness of death. Tears blurred her vision as she tightened her grip around her ceremonial sword. "I'm too late." 2 hours earlier Thomas Wright pushed his cleaning cart down the polished hallway, humming quietly to himself. At 58 years old, the human janitor had become almost invisible within the royal palace. That suited him perfectly. He preferred quiet work over attention. The Kalen viewed humans as harmless laborers, short-lived, physically weaker, and incapable of telepathy. Thomas never argued with that assumption. He simply cleaned floors, repaired equipment, and stayed out of everyone's way. As he polished a crystal display near the nursery entrance, movement caught his attention. Commander Sterling approached the East Wing. Something immediately felt wrong. Instead of ceremonial armor, Sterling wore dark tactical gear. Behind him marched 12 heavily armed soldiers dressed in black combat suits. Thomas kept his head lowered while watching their reflection in the polished marble. Military formation. Combat spacing. No palace protocol. Every instinct he had buried decades earlier quietly awakened. Sterling stopped outside the nursery doors and removed a small metallic cylinder from his belt. With a simple twist, the device emitted a faint blue pulse. The reaction was immediate. Inside the nursery, the head nanny screamed, not in physical pain, but in psychic agony. Two nearby Kalen guards collapsed instantly, blood streaming from their ears as they convulsed on the floor. Thomas stood perfectly still. He felt nothing. To a human, the neural scourge was nothing more than a silent piece of metal. Sterling calmly stepped over the dying guards and drew his plasma pistol. "Sweep every room," he ordered coldly. "Leave none of the royal bloodline alive." The words hit Thomas harder than any weapon. The twins. They were only a few rooms away. For 10 years, Thomas had hidden from the man he used to be. He had abandoned his military career. He had buried every memory of war. He had sworn never to kill again. But hearing armed assassins march toward two innocent children shattered that promise. Without hesitation, Thomas snapped the wooden handle off his mop. It wasn't much. A broken stick. A bucket filled with industrial cleaning solvent. And 30 years of elite close-quarters combat experience. As the last assassin paused beside a marble pillar, Thomas silently stepped out of the shadows. One precise strike. The sharpened wood drove beneath the alien's jaw and into his brain. The soldier collapsed without making a sound. Thomas caught the falling plasma rifle before it hit the floor, removed the combat knife from the corpse, and dragged the body into the darkness. He checked the rifle's power cell. Full charge. The old janitor disappeared. The soldier returned. "All right," Thomas whispered to himself. Thomas moved before the assassins even realized one of their men was missing. Hidden in the darkness, he dragged the body behind a marble pillar, stripped away anything useful, and checked the stolen plasma rifle. The weapon still carried a full power cell. Good enough. For years, he'd convinced himself that life as a janitor had erased the soldier he once was. He was wrong. The old instincts returned effortlessly. Inside the nursery, Commander Sterling stood before the reinforced playroom doors. Emergency lockdown had sealed the children inside, but a breaching torch was already melting through the thick durasteel. "Hurry!" Sterling barked. "The Queen will return soon. I want those children dead before her ship lands." Thomas glanced toward the maintenance panel hidden behind decorative wall trim. A plan formed instantly. He slipped into a nearby service corridor and cut power to the east wing. The palace lights died. Darkness swallowed the hallway. The assassins activated their helmet visors, scanning every corner. "Who killed the lights?" one of them shouted. Before anyone could answer, a faint hissing echoed through the ventilation system. Thomas had rerouted industrial cleaning solvent into the air circulation units. The chemical wasn't strong enough to melt military armor, but it rapidly corroded optical lenses. Within seconds, smoke like mist settled across the assassins' visors. "My display's failing. I can't see." Sterling cursed. "Switch to thermal." Too late. A single plasma shot exploded from the darkness. One mercenary dropped instantly. The others fired wildly in every direction, filling the nursery with blue plasma bolts that tore apart priceless artwork, furniture, and marble columns. Thomas was already gone. He never stayed in one place. He knew every maintenance passage, every blind corner, every piece of cover inside the palace. Years of cleaning had taught him the building better than any security officer. Two assassins advanced toward the doorway. Thomas appeared behind them like a shadow. His combat knife slipped beneath the first soldier's helmet, severing the spine in one clean movement. Before the second mercenary could react, Thomas shoved the dying body forward as a shield. 3 plasma rounds slammed into the corpse. Thomas leaned around it and fired once. The second assassin collapsed. Sterling's confidence disappeared. "Find him," he roared. "Thermal scanners." One soldier looked at his display, confusion spreading across his face. "Commander." "What?" "The target isn't Kalen." Sterling frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The heat signature is human." Silence. "A human? Impossible. No human should have been capable of dismantling trained mercenaries." Thomas crouched behind an overturned desk and checked his rifle. 10 shots remained. 6 enemies left. A plasma bolt had grazed his shoulder, burning through flesh, but pain meant nothing now. Then he heard it. Soft crying behind the playroom door. The twins were still alive. Thomas smiled for the first time. "Hang on, kids." He reached into his maintenance pouch and cracked a chemical glow stick. The bright green light rolled across the floor. Every assassin turned and fired toward it. Thomas charged from the opposite direction. Before they realized the trick, he was already among them. His knife flashed. One enemy fell. The butt of the plasma rifle crushed another's helmet. A third reached for his sidearm. Thomas slammed him into a marble column hard enough to crack both the stone and the alien's neck. Only Sterling and 2 mercenaries remained. Their disciplined formation had completely collapsed. Instead of hunting one old janitor, they were being hunted. Outside, Queen Isolde finally stepped through the shattered nursery entrance. Smoke burned her lungs. The room looked as though an army had fought inside it. Black scorch marks covered every wall. The crystal chandelier had crashed onto the marble floor. Furniture lay splintered across the room. Bodies were everywhere. She counted them instinctively. 1, 3, 7, 12. Every assassin who had entered the nursery was dead. Some had been shot with surgical precision. Others had been killed in brutal hand-to-hand combat. One body had been pinned to a wall with a broken wooden beam. Another's helmet had been crushed by a brass fire extinguisher. This wasn't a desperate last stand. It was systematic. Professional. Someone had hunted elite killers one by one. Her heart pounded. Lysander. Aurelia. For one agonizing second, there was only silence. Then a tiny frightened voice answered. "Mama." The sound came from behind a barricade built from overturned desks, metal cabinets, and reinforced glass panels. Isolde hurled the heavy furniture aside. There they were. Covered in soot. Shaking with fear. But alive. She dropped to her knees and wrapped both children tightly in her arms. Tears streamed down her face. "I've got you. You're safe." Lysander pointed toward the center of the ruined nursery. "The quiet man saved us." Isolde slowly looked up. Leaning against a cracked marble pillar stood Thomas Wright. His gray janitor's uniform was soaked in blue Kalen blood and his own. His left arm hung uselessly from a severe plasma burn. A chipped combat knife rested loosely in one hand. At his feet lay Commander Sterling. The commander's armor was almost untouched. His neck, however, had been twisted at an impossible angle. Thomas looked exhausted. His breathing was shallow. Yet his eyes no longer belonged to a harmless janitor. They belonged to a man who had survived countless battlefields. Isolde stared at him in disbelief. "Thomas. You. Did all of this?" Thomas spat blood onto the broken marble and gave a tired shrug. "They brought a neural scourge." He tossed the small metallic device onto the floor between them. "Worked great on your guards." He looked at the frightened twins before meeting the Queen's eyes. "But it doesn't work on humans." His knees suddenly buckled. Blood loss finally caught up with him. As Thomas collapsed toward the floor, Isolde rushed forward to catch him. The mystery surrounding the quiet janitor had only just begun. Thomas regained consciousness in a high-tier Kalen trauma ward. For a brief moment, he thought he was back on an old battlefield. The sterile smell, the bright lights, and the weightlessness of the medical pod dragged him 30 years into the past. Then he heard a calm voice. "Easy, Sergeant. You're safe." His eyes opened. Standing beside the gravebed was Queen Isolde, no longer wearing her blood-stained ceremonial robes. Instead, she had changed into dark combat armor. Lieutenant Grayson stood nearby, while two royal guards watched Thomas with cautious respect rather than suspicion. The medical gel drained away as the suspension field shut down. Thomas slowly sat up and flexed his injured shoulder. The deep plasma burn that should have crippled him had almost completely healed. "Alien medicine," he muttered. "Not bad. You've been unconscious for 18 hours, Isolde said. Thomas nodded. "The children?" "They're safe," Grayson answered immediately. "Hidden in a secure bunker beneath the palace. No one can reach them without the Queen's authorization." Only then did Thomas relax. "Good." For several seconds, silence filled the room. Finally, Isolde dismissed the guards with a gesture. The doors sealed behind them, leaving only herself, Grayson, and Thomas. Her expression hardened. "We recovered Commander Sterling's memory core before it degraded." Thomas looked up. "So? It confirms our fears." She activated a holographic display. Sterling hadn't acted alone. The attack had been financed through secret accounts connected to members of the Ethelgard High Council. The neural scourge had also come from military stockpiles that only the highest-ranking officials could access. "This wasn't terrorism," Isolde said quietly. "It was a coup." Thomas folded his arms. "Who's behind it?" "My Lord Regent. Alistair." She spoke the name with controlled anger. "My second-in-command. Publicly, he supported me. Privately, he wanted my throne." Grayson expanded the hologram. Another image appeared. A massive black warship floated near the edge of the star system. "Our deep space sensors detected this vessel only a few hours ago," Grayson explained. "It's a Vornak Syndicate dreadnought operating under stealth protocols." Thomas studied the ship. He recognized its brutal design immediately. "I've seen ships like this before." Grayson continued. "The assassins inside the palace were only the first wave. If Alistair learns his plan failed, he'll signal the dreadnought to enter orbit." The room became silent. Thomas finally looked at the Queen. "You're trapped." She nodded. "My military is compromised." "The palace?" "Compromised." "The Royal Guard?" "I don't know who I can trust anymore." Thomas sighed. "So if you arrest Alistair openly, a civil war begins. Millions could die before the real enemy even attacked." The Queen looked directly into Thomas's eyes. "Which brings me to you." She tapped another command. A classified Terran military file appeared in the air. Thomas Wright. United Space Command. Orbital Drop Shock Infantry. Rank, Gunnery Sergeant. Decorations. Black Operations. Combat Citations. Mission Records. Grayson stared at the file in complete disbelief. "You weren't just a soldier." Thomas remained silent. "You led special operations teams," Grayson whispered. "You fought during the expansion wars." Still no answer. Isolde continued reading. "Helios Ridge." Her voice slowed. "You infiltrated an enemy fortress with only 3 soldiers and destroyed an entire planetary defense cannon." Grayson looked between the file and Thomas. "You were one of the Hell Jumpers." Thomas leaned back and closed his eyes. "I was a lot of things." The room remained quiet. Finally, he spoke. When diplomacy failed, we went in. When orbital bombardment wasn't possible, we finished the job. His voice carried no pride. Only exhaustion. I spent 30 years fighting wars no one was supposed to know existed. He looked at his scarred hands. I've done things that still wake me up at night. He gave a bitter smile. So I disappeared. I forged civilian records. Took a janitor's job. And promised myself I'd never carry another weapon. His eyes drifted toward the window overlooking the damaged palace. But then someone tried to murder 2 children. Silence. I realized I'm not as retired as I thought. The Queen stepped closer. Her normally calm telepathic aura trembled with emotion. My people are telepaths. We feel every mind around us. When we fight, we hesitate. We hear fear. We feel pain. It makes us compassionate. But today, it nearly destroyed us. She placed one hand over her heart. I need someone who doesn't hesitate. I need someone who isn't affected by the neural scourge. I need someone who can fight monsters. Thomas looked away. He remembered the twins hiding behind that barricade. He remembered the terrified look in their eyes. He slowly stood. The tired old janitor vanished. A veteran returned. His voice became sharp and commanding. Lieutenant Grayson. Grayson instinctively stood at attention. Sir. Contact the Terran embassy. Grayson blinked. For what? I know every emergency weapons cache humanity hides inside diplomatic compounds. Even Isolde looked surprised. Thomas continued calmly. Every embassy has a classified contingency vault. If things get ugly enough, they break the glass. A faint smile crossed his face. And things just got ugly. The Queen studied him carefully. So, will you help us? Thomas stared through the window at the burning city below. I didn't want this life anymore. He paused. But someone declared war. He turned toward Isolde. If I'm doing this, we do it my way. No honorable duels. No unnecessary speeches. We end this before more innocent people die. For the first time since the attack began, the Queen allowed herself a small smile. She had finally found someone capable of fighting a war her people never could. The quiet janitor was gone. The galaxy was about to meet Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Wright once again. The Citadel's war room, once a symbol of unity, had turned into a stage for betrayal. Lord Regent Alistair stood before the High Council wearing robes of mourning, his expression carefully crafted to appear sorrowful. The tragedy in the East Wing has left our Queen emotionally unstable, he announced. Until she recovers, I am invoking Regency protocol. From this moment forward, command of the military falls to me. Several ministers exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared object. Alistair continued confidently. Our first priority is restoring order. Lower the planetary defense grid so relief ships may enter orbit. In reality, those relief ships were Vornak warships waiting for his signal. Just as his hand reached the tactical console, boom. The massive Durasteel doors exploded inward. Dust filled the chamber. Every guard reached for their weapons. 2 figures emerged from the smoke. Queen Isolde walked in wearing full battle armor, her telepathic aura so powerful that several ministers instinctively stepped backward. Beside her walked Thomas Wright. Gone was the gray janitor's uniform. He now wore matte black Terran assault armor scarred from countless battles. Resting across his shoulder was an intimidating magnetic rail rifle unlike anything the Kalan had ever seen. The room fell silent. Regency protocol denied, Isolde declared. Alistair's calm expression faltered. Sovereign, you're alive. So are my children. Those 4 words struck the room like thunder. For the first time, genuine panic flashed across Alistair's face. It lasted only a second, but Isolde saw it. That single reaction confirmed his guilt. "You tried to murder my family," she said coldly. "And you failed." She stepped aside, gesturing toward Thomas. "Meet my new first sword." Murmurs spread through the chamber. "A human?" One of the Taurian commanders laughed openly. Commander Vane, a towering Kaelan warrior, looked Thomas up and down with open contempt. "A janitor," he scoffed. "You replaced the royal guard with a maintenance worker." Without raising her voice, Isolde answered, "He killed 12 Vornak assassins by himself." The room became quiet. Vane shook his head. "I don't believe it." He ignited his glowing plasma saber. "If this human wishes to stand beside the Queen, let him prove himself." Thomas didn't move. He simply set his helmet on the floor. Vane charged. To the Kaelan watching, their commander moved with blinding speed. To Thomas, it looked slow. The veteran calmly stepped half a pace to the side. The plasma blade missed him completely. Before Vane could recover, Thomas swung the steel stock of his rail rifle with terrifying force. Crack! The reinforced weapon smashed into the sensitive neural cluster behind Vane's neck. The giant warrior collapsed instantly. The duel had lasted barely 2 seconds. Silence swallowed the chamber. The remaining commanders lowered their weapons without being told. Thomas calmly picked up his helmet. "I don't enjoy proving people wrong," he said. "But I don't mind doing it." Then he looked directly at Alistair. "So, who's next?" For the first time, the Lord Regent looked genuinely afraid. He raised both hands. "This is madness. A human cannot threaten the High Council." No one moved to defend him. Every guard had just witnessed their strongest commander defeated with a single strike. Isolde stepped forward. "Lord Regent Alistair. You are stripped of rank. Stripped of authority. And charged with high treason." Before anyone could arrest him, Alistair smiled. A cold, hopeless, desperate smile. "You think you've won?" He pressed a hidden control on his wrist device. Somewhere deep inside the palace, an encrypted signal shot into space. Seconds later, the entire citadel shook violently. Alarms screamed throughout the building. Lieutenant Grayson's voice echoed across the war room. "Emergency alert. A massive Vornak dreadnought has entered low orbit." A holographic display appeared above the tactical table. Red markers flooded across the capital. Enemy drop pods. Hundreds of them. The invasion had begun. Alistair laughed. "You stopped my assassins. But you can't stop an army." Thomas ignored him. He was already studying the tactical map. His mind worked faster than everyone else's. "Grayson." "Yes, Sergeant." "Is the package ready?" Grayson hesitated. "It is. But if we use it, we use it." Without another word, Thomas locked his helmet into place. The black visor sealed shut with a mechanical hiss. His voice now sounded cold through the helmet speakers. "Your Majesty. I suggest you move every civilian below ground." Isolde looked at him. "What are you planning?" Thomas checked the power level of his rail gun. "The Vornak rely on energy shields." "Correct. They're excellent against plasma." Another explosion rocked the palace. But humanity never trusted plasma. He loaded a fresh magazine of tungsten rounds. "We still believe in high-speed metal." Even Grayson couldn't hide his curiosity. "What happens when a Mach 7 slug hits an energy shield?" Thomas gave the smallest smile. "The shield survives. For about half a second. Then it overloads. The generator explodes. And the man wearing it dies with it. He started walking toward the destroyed doors. Outside, hundreds of enemy troops were already landing inside the capital. One man. An entire invasion force. Thomas never looked back. "Welcome," he muttered quietly, to the meat grinder. The palace gates exploded inward as hundreds of Vornak mercenaries poured into the royal courtyard. Their armored dropships crushed gardens and statues beneath their landing gear. Soldiers spread out with practiced precision, purple energy shields glowing around them as plasma weapons scanned every entrance. Commander Garrett, a scarred Vornak veteran, stepped off the lead dropship and surveyed the battlefield. "The Queen is worth more alive," he ordered. "Everyone else dies." The mercenaries advanced confidently. The Citadel's automated defenses had gone silent, exactly as Alistair had promised. To them, victory seemed inevitable. Then the massive palace doors slowly opened. Only one man walked out. Thomas Wright. His black assault armor was scorched from earlier battles, while the heavy M76 rail gun rested calmly in his hands. The Vornak soldiers exchanged confused looks. Garrett laughed. "A single human." He activated his external speakers. "Drop the weapon, little primate. Perhaps we'll let you live long enough to polish our boots." Thomas didn't answer. He simply raised the rail gun. Boom! The deafening crack echoed across the courtyard. There was no glowing plasma. No laser beam. Only a blur moving faster than sound. Garrett's second-in-command never saw it coming. His energy shield flared brilliantly as it tried to absorb the incoming projectile. Then, it overloaded. The shield generator exploded against his back. The tungsten round punched through his armor, tearing straight through his chest before hurling him several meters across the courtyard. Silence. Every mercenary froze. They had fought plasma weapons all their lives. Nothing like this. Thomas calmly cycled another round into the chamber. 1. Garrett finally recovered. "Kill him." Green plasma bolts erupted across the courtyard. Thomas dove behind a shattered stone pillar just before the barrage struck. Ancient marble melted under the intense heat. Inside his helmet, warning lights flashed as temperatures climbed. He ignored every alert. The moment enemy fire slowed, he leaned out. Crack! Another mercenary collapsed. His shield exploded before the round ever reached his armor. Thomas fired again. Another soldier disappeared in a cloud of sparks and shattered metal. Panic spread through the Vornak ranks. "Our shields are failing. What weapon is that?" Garrett snarled. "Flank him." Nearly 20 mercenaries activated their jump packs and raced toward Thomas's left side. Inside the Citadel's command center, Lieutenant Grayson tracked every movement through surveillance drones. "Sergeant," he warned over the comms. 20 hostiles approaching your left flank. They'll surround you in seconds." Thomas calmly replaced his magazine. "I know." He checked one final status display. Then asked quietly, "Is the package ready?" Grayson hesitated. "It's in position. But the blast radius, I'll survive." The young lieutenant took a deep breath. Target locked. Thomas crouched deeper behind the stone pillar. "Execute the protocol." Far above Corvus Prime, a classified Terran military satellite silently opened its launch bay. There were no missiles. No lasers. No warheads. Instead, 3 enormous tungsten rods slipped free. Each weighed nearly 20 tons. Gravity became their engine. Back in the courtyard, Grayson began counting. Impact in 3. The mercenaries kept charging. 2. Thomas pressed himself tightly against the pillar. 1. The sky screamed. 3 blazing streaks ripped through the atmosphere like falling suns. Several Vornak soldiers looked upward. Confusion turned into horror. The rod struck the battlefield with unimaginable force. The explosion wasn't nuclear, but it looked like the end of the world. A colossal shockwave flattened everything in its path. Dropships folded like paper. Stone walls shattered. Armored vehicles flipped through the air. Mercenaries vanished beneath expanding clouds of dust, fire, and pulverized rock. The entire citadel shook. Inside the palace, ministers were thrown off their feet. Even Queen Isolde struggled to remain standing. When the deafening roar finally faded, silence returned. Thomas slowly stood from behind the damaged pillar. His armor displayed dozens of warning messages. Minor fractures. Concussion damage. External plating compromised. Still operational. He looked across the courtyard. Nothing remained of the invasion force. Where hundreds of elite mercenaries had stood moments earlier. Only a massive smoking crater remained. Broken armor littered the shattered ground. 3 Vornak dropships had simply ceased to exist. Thomas keyed his communicator. Package delivered. Grayson released the breath he'd been holding. Confirmed. Then his tone suddenly changed. Sergeant. You need to look up. Thomas slowly raised his head. The sunlight disappeared. A shadow swallowed the city. High above Ithalgard, an enormous black warship descended through the clouds. The Vornak dreadnought. Leviathan. It was so enormous that it seemed to replace the sky itself. Heavy plasma cannons lined its hull while dozens of launch bays opened beneath it. Moments later, a mechanical voice thundered across the entire capital. Attention! Citizens of Ithalgard. You have destroyed our advance force. You now have 5 minutes. Surrender Queen Isolde. Failure to comply will result in complete orbital bombardment. Millions of lives suddenly hung by a thread. Queen Isolde stepped beside Thomas, staring at the impossible warship above. If they fire, the city dies. Thomas removed his damaged helmet. Blood trickled from his nose after the devastating shockwave, but his eyes never left the dreadnought. We're not fighting an army anymore, he said quietly. We're fighting a fortress. For the first time since the battle began. Even Thomas Wright knew the real war had only just started. The colossal shadow of the Leviathan stretched across the entire capital. Its massive hull blocked the sunlight as dozens of plasma batteries locked onto the city below. The countdown had begun. 5 minutes. Queen Isolde stood beside Thomas, her eyes fixed on the warship. If they fire, she said quietly, millions will die. Thomas studied the dreadnought in silence. Then he turned toward the war room. We need the planetary shield. Isolde's expression darkened. We can't activate it. Why not? Alistair locked the main defense network using his biometric authorization. The system only accepts his genetic signature and telepathic resonance. Thomas looked toward the corridor leading to the prison cells. So we make him unlock it. It isn't that simple, Isolde replied. If he's threatened, tortured, or killed, his neural pattern changes. The system interprets that as a security breach and permanently locks itself. Thomas cursed under his breath. So the traitor has to cooperate willingly. Exactly. The mechanical voice of the Leviathan echoed across the city again. 4 minutes remaining. Every second mattered. Thomas stared at the warship, calculating possibilities. Finally, an old memory surfaced. Raton. Isolde frowned. What? An old Terran assault doctrine. She waited. When humanity first encountered larger alien fleets, we couldn't match their firepower. So we stopped fighting them head-on. What did you do? Thomas looked directly at the dreadnought. We went inside. Understanding slowly appeared on Isolde's face. You want to board it? He nodded. Their shields are strongest against attacks from outside. But if someone plants a bomb inside the ship, the shields become useless. Isolde remained silent for several moments. The royal transport has a prototype stealth drive, she finally said. It can bend light and hide us from enemy sensors. Thomas's eyes lit up. How long can it stay cloaked? Only a few minutes before the system overheats. A few minutes is all I need. He immediately turned toward the palace hangar. I'm boarding that ship. Isolde grabbed his arm. Thomas. He stopped. There are nearly 1,000 mercenaries aboard that dreadnought. Thomas calmly opened a storage compartment on the back of his armor. Inside rested a heavy yellow cylinder marked with multiple hazard symbols. He carefully lifted it into his hands. I don't need to fight 1,000 soldiers. Isolde stared at the device. What is that? A tactical antimatter charge. Even Grayson took a step backward. Thomas smiled faintly. I borrowed it years ago from a Terran blacksite armory. You borrowed it? I forgot to return it. No one laughed. Everyone understood what kind of weapon he was holding. If I plant this inside the Leviathan's reactor, Thomas explained, the resulting chain reaction will destroy the ship from the inside. Isolde immediately understood. The explosion would bypass the shields. Exactly. She looked at him. Then at the bomb. Then back at him. A painful realization crossed her face. This is a one-way mission. Thomas didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. The city survives. That's enough. He secured the antimatter charge against his armor and began walking toward the hangar. Behind him, Isolde spoke firmly. No. Thomas stopped again. I won't allow it. You don't have a choice. I do. She stepped in front of him. You came to my world as a simple worker. You protected my children. You saved my people. I refuse to let you die alone. Thomas shook his head. Your Majesty. You're the Queen. If you die, the Empire falls. She met his gaze without hesitation. If I stay here while another person sacrifices himself for my people, I don't deserve to wear this crown. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then, with one smooth motion, Isolde drew her glowing silver sword. Thomas instinctively reached for his rail gun. But the Queen didn't attack. Instead, she placed the sword against her forehead in the traditional Kaelan salute reserved only for equals. I am coming with you. Thomas blinked. No. That's an order. I'm ignoring it. You can't. I absolutely can. For the first time since they'd met, Isolde smiled. So humans really are stubborn. We perfected it. Grayson watched the exchange, unable to hide a grin despite the situation. Finally, Thomas sighed. I can't believe I'm arguing with a queen. And losing. I noticed. He looked toward the waiting royal transport. Fine. But once we're aboard, you follow my orders. Isolde extended her hand. Agreed. Thomas shook it. Then let's steal ourselves a dreadnought. Minutes later, Pilot Bennett sat inside the cockpit of the Gilded Crest, trying to steady his trembling hands. Behind him stood the two people about to attempt the most impossible mission in Kaelan history. The Queen tightened the straps on her battle armor. Thomas loaded fresh tungsten rounds into his rail gun before securing the antimatter charge across his chest. Bennett swallowed nervously. Your Majesty. The stealth drive was designed for diplomatic escape. It wasn't built for combat. If we're detected, we'll be destroyed before we reach the hull. Isolde calmly fastened her. sword to her side. Then don't let us be detected. Thomas checked his helmet seal. Our target is beneath the dreadnought's main engines. The radiation there will interfere with their sensors. Bennett nodded weakly. I'll get you there. He powered up the engines. Outside, the Leviathan's countdown continued. 2 minutes remaining. The hangar doors slowly opened. The sleek royal transport lifted into the burning sky. A moment later, its experimental stealth field activated. The ship vanished. Invisible against the clouds, the gilded crest accelerated toward the largest warship either of them had ever seen. The fate of an empire now depended on two people, a warrior queen. And the janitor who had become humanity's deadliest soldier once again. The gilded crest slipped silently through the clouds, its prototype stealth field bending light around the ship. From a distance, it was invisible. Inside the cockpit, Pilot Bennett kept his hands locked on the controls. I've never flown this close to an enemy flagship, he admitted. Thomas stood behind him, watching the tactical display. Relax. I'm trying. No, you're panicking. Bennett glanced at him. There's a difference. Thomas almost smiled. Not when you're flying. Ahead, the Leviathan filled the entire windshield. It was far larger than anything Bennett had imagined, nearly 10 kilometers long, covered with rows of plasma cannons, missile ports, and fighter hangars. The warship looked less like a vessel, and more like a floating city. Lieutenant Grayson's voice crackled through the encrypted comm, stealth field is holding. So far. Thomas checked the timer. How much longer? 3 minutes before the stealth drive overheats. That's enough. The transport continued toward the dreadnought's engine section, where intense radiation distorted enemy sensors. Suddenly, a warning alarm sounded. Bennett's face turned pale. They're launching fighters. Dozens of sleek Vornak interceptors emerged from the Leviathan's hangars, spreading into patrol formations. They can't see us, Isolde said. They don't have to, Thomas replied. They're searching randomly. If one flies through us. The sentence didn't need finishing. Everyone understood. Bennett reduced the engines to minimum thrust. The transport drifted silently between two patrol groups. One interceptor passed less than 20 meters away. Inside the cockpit, no one dared breathe. After several agonizing seconds, the fighters continued their patrol. Bennett finally exhaled. I hate stealth missions. Thomas looked ahead. We're here. The transport reached the underside of the Leviathan, where enormous engine vents glowed with blue energy. Hold position, Thomas ordered. Bennett activated magnetic anchors against the hull. The ship attached itself without making a sound. The countdown on the stealth system flashed red. 1 minute remaining. Thomas picked up the antimatter charge and secured it to his back. Then he turned toward Isolde. You remember the plan? She nodded. You destroy the reactor. I keep your escape route open. If things go wrong. They won't. She smiled faintly. You really believe that? No. I just don't waste time thinking about failure. The rear hatch opened. A wave of freezing vacuum swept inside as both of them activated their magnetic boots. The stars stretched endlessly around them. Below was the planet. Above them towered the black armor of the Leviathan. Thomas fired a magnetic grappling line. The hook locked onto the hull. Move. They crossed the surface in silence, using maintenance rails for cover. After several hundred meters, they found a service hatch. Thomas attached a compact breaching charge. 3, 2, 1. Thump. The explosion was almost silent in space. The hatch folded inward. They climbed inside. Emergency lights bathed the maintenance corridor in red. The hum of the Leviathan's reactors echoed through the walls. Thomas checked the holographic map. The reactor is 6 decks below. Before they could move, footsteps. 2 Vornak engineers rounded the corner. Neither expected to find intruders aboard their own flagship. Thomas acted instantly. He grabbed the first engineer, covered his mouth, and knocked him unconscious with a precise strike. Isolde moved just as quickly. The second engineer reached for an alarm panel, her silver blade stopped inches from his throat. "Don't." The terrified engineer slowly raised his hands. Thomas bound both prisoners and disabled the alarm. "No unnecessary killing," Isolde whispered. Thomas nodded. "They're crew. Not soldiers." They continued deeper into the ship. The closer they came to the reactor, the tighter security became. 2 armored guards stood outside a blast door. Thomas motioned for silence. He pulled a small metal sphere from his pouch and rolled it across the corridor. The guards frowned. One bent down to inspect it. A blinding flash erupted. Both soldiers cried out, temporarily blinded. Thomas charged first. One guard collapsed from a strike to the throat. Isolde disarmed the second before knocking him unconscious with the hilt of her sword. The blast door slid open. Beyond it lay the reactor chamber. Blue energy surged through massive conduits feeding power to every weapon and shield aboard the Leviathan. Thomas carefully removed the antimatter charge. "This is it." He knelt beside the reactor housing and connected the detonator. A green light appeared. "Armed." 30 seconds. He stood up. "Let's go." Before either of them could move, a slow clap echoed through the chamber. "Impressive." A tall figure stepped out from the shadows, surrounded by heavily armed Vornak commandos. He wore black combat armor trimmed with gold, and unlike the others, he carried no rifle. Only a long energy blade rested at his side. Thomas immediately recognized him. General Kale. The Vornak commander smiled. "So. The famous ghost of Helios Ridge. I heard you died years ago." Thomas's expression hardened. "I was hoping the same about you." Kale laughed. "I should have known only you would be reckless enough to board my flagship." His eyes shifted toward the armed bomb beside the reactor. A clever plan. But unfortunately. He pressed a control on his wrist. The reactor chamber sealed shut with massive blast doors, locking them inside. Kale slowly drew his glowing energy blade. "You won't be leaving this ship alive." Thomas raised his rail gun. Only to hear a mechanical click. Empty. His last magazine had been spent fighting through the ship. Kale smiled wider. "I planned for that." Thomas quietly dropped the empty rifle. Then pulled the combat knife from his belt. Across from him, Isolde ignited her silver blade. The reactor countdown continued in the background. 23 seconds. The final battle had begun. The reactor chamber fell silent except for the steady hum of the Leviathan's core. The antimatter charge blinked beside the reactor. 23 seconds. General Kale stood between Thomas and the only exit, surrounded by 8 elite commandos. A faint smile crossed his face. "You've always had a talent for impossible missions, Sergeant." Thomas spun the combat knife once in his hand. "I get bored easily." Kale laughed. "Kill them." The commandos opened fire. Thomas grabbed Isolde and threw both of them behind the reactor housing as plasma bolts carved glowing scars across the chamber. The antimatter charge continued its countdown. 20 seconds. "We're trapped," Isolde shouted. Thomas quickly scanned the room. Every entrance was sealed. No cover. No escape. Only one option remained. He pointed toward a maintenance conduit running beneath the reactor. "See that tunnel?" Isolde nodded. It leads outside the ship. It'll barely fit one person. I know. She looked at him, already understanding what he intended. No. Thomas ignored her. He pulled 2 compact smoke grenades from his belt and rolled them into the open. The chamber filled with thick gray smoke. Kale's commandos switched to thermal vision. Exactly as Thomas expected. He grabbed a portable coolant pipe from the wall and smashed it open. Supercooled vapor flooded the room, freezing the smoke into a dense cloud. Thermal scanners instantly became useless. The commandos were blind. Thomas moved first. A knife flashed through the fog. One soldier dropped. He seized the fallen mercenary's rifle and fired twice. 2 more commandos collapsed before they even saw him. Kale swung his glowing blade through the smoke. Thomas barely ducked in time. The energy blade sliced through the reactor railing behind him. The veteran rolled aside and slammed the rifle stock into Kale's ribs. The general barely moved. He was stronger than any opponent Thomas had faced since leaving the military. The 2 men exchanged brutal blows. Steel against energy. Experience against raw power. Across the chamber, Isolde fought the remaining commandos with astonishing speed. Her silver blade danced through the smoke, disarming one soldier after another. She refused to kill unless absolutely necessary. Thomas couldn't afford the same mercy. One commando lunged toward the bomb. Thomas fired a single shot. The mercenary fell inches away from the detonator. 15 seconds. Kale charged again. This time, his blade cut through Thomas's shoulder armor, sending him crashing against the reactor housing. Pain shot through his entire arm. The rifle slipped from his hands. Kale pointed his weapon at Thomas's chest. You should have stayed a janitor. Thomas smiled despite the pain. I actually liked that job. Before Kale could strike, Isolde appeared behind him. Her blade collided with his, forcing the general backward. Go, she shouted. Thomas looked at the countdown. 12 seconds. No. Thomas. I'm not leaving you. You have to. She blocked another powerful strike from Kale. If we both stay. No one survives. For the first time since they met, her voice broke. My people still need their hero. Thomas shook his head. They already have one. He looked directly into her eyes. You. She froze for a split second. Thomas grabbed her wrist. Without giving her time to argue, he activated the emergency magnetic launcher attached to his armor. The powerful device hurled Isolde across the chamber toward the maintenance conduit. She crashed through the narrow opening just as the emergency hatch sealed behind her. Thomas. Her voice echoed from the tunnel. Thomas smiled faintly. Take care of the kids. Kale laughed. A noble sacrifice. Thomas slowly stood, blood running down his arm. He glanced at the blinking bomb. 7 seconds. Kale raised his blade for the final strike. Then, a warning siren echoed throughout the Leviathan. Unauthorized reactor breach detected. Every blast door in the reactor chamber automatically unlocked. Kale looked up in confusion. Thomas grinned. I wasn't trying to escape. I was buying time. With all his remaining strength, Thomas tackled Kale. The 2 men crashed through the opening blast doors and into the central reactor platform. Kale punched him repeatedly, but Thomas refused to let go. The antimatter charge reached 3. Kale finally realized the truth. His confidence vanished. You fool. Thomas tightened his grip. You invaded the wrong planet. 2. Kale struggled desperately. Thomas never released him. 1. A blinding white light consumed the reactor. Far outside the Leviathan, Bennett had just pulled the gilded crest away from the warship when an enormous burst of light erupted from its center. For one heartbeat. Nothing happened. Then the dreadnought cracked apart from within. Its shields collapsed. Its engines exploded one after another. The gigantic vessel folded in on itself before disintegrating into thousands of burning fragments that rained harmlessly into space. The invasion was over. Hours later, the citizens of Ethelgard gathered before the palace. Lord Regent Alistair and every surviving conspirator had been arrested. The High Council publicly admitted the truth behind the coup. Queen Isolde stood on the palace balcony with Prince Lysander and Princess Aurelia beside her. The crowd cheered, but her eyes remained fixed on the stars. No celebration could erase what had been lost. Then, an officer rushed through the crowd. "Your Majesty." She turned. "We've recovered an escape capsule." Hope flickered across her face. It was launched seconds before the Leviathan exploded. The officer handed her a damaged military identification tag. The name engraved on the metal made her smile through her tears. Thomas Wright. There was no body. No confirmation of death. Only an empty escape pod drifting through deep space. Isolde closed her hand around the tag. "He survived," Aurelia whispered hopefully. The Queen looked toward the endless stars. A small smile appeared. "I don't know where he is. But knowing Thomas, he's probably already looking for another quiet job." Far beyond the Kalen reach, a battered escape capsule drifted silently through space. Inside, an exhausted old soldier slowly opened his eyes. He looked at the blinking emergency beacon inside. So much for retirement. A faint smile crossed his face as the capsule disappeared into the darkness.